Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of the day it is you are joining us. This is the Tulsa World Scene podcast with a special Marvel Universe edition, which means I'm not going to be talking all that much. Um, a couple of I guess it was this past Sunday, my colleague here, Jimmy Trammell, uh, wrote a story about a new exhibit that opens in a couple of days in Wyoming, of all places. But it is something that a great many people I know will have an interest in because it is about the comic book legend Stan Lee. Um, I was never a big comic book fan as a youngster. Just I read other things, but I know he is extremely important in the comic book world. And Jimmy, you know maybe more about him than most.
I have read like four or five biographies on Stan, and so I've got a wide range of Stan. Uh, what's the word? Stuff that has to
Really?
go somewhere. Uh,
Yeah.
but but just to give a little context, one of the reasons we wrote about this story of the Stan Lee papers being housed at the University of Wyoming, and then a new exhibit being created this month uh, at the University of Wyoming's American Heritage Center from that with items plucked from the Stan Lee papers that are housed there is because there's a Tulsa connection. Uh, Keith Bailey of Tulsa is the chair of the board of the American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming. And it was at his suggestion, the students who cherry picked the Stan Lee papers to create this Stan Lee exhibit traveled from Wyoming to Tulsa to check out the Bob Dylan Center and the Woody Guthrie Center to kind of get an idea of, oh, this is how you do a display, a museum exhibit on one person's life and how to put that person's life in context with the world around it. So they enjoyed their time in Tulsa and thought they learned a thing or two. Um, and then coincidentally, there's going to be a Stan Lee SuperCon at the University of Wyoming to further get the word out that Wyoming has the Stan Lee papers. And that convention will be run by someone from Tulsa, Scott Kinney, who does shows all over the region. Just, crazy to connect the dots somehow. But if I would have asked you, James, before we had this conversation, before you knew this, hey, James, which college do you think Stan Lee's papers would be located? His collection, his archives. Which college do you think they'd be housed at? You would never have guessed Wyoming.
No, I wouldn't. If I remember correctly, he is he from California or did he just live most of his life in California? I figured that it would probably be some um, Los Angeles or California, someplace since his work now is maybe almost better known for the movies adapted from it, that would be a logical place for his archives to be housed, to be studied.
He was born and raised in New York,
Okay.
and actually started working for Marvel before it was Marvel as a teenager. His a relative, an in-law, was the big honcho at Marvel. So he went not to college but to work, and went to work and eventually became the face of Marvel. But born and raised in New York, moved to California later in his life when he wanted to say, what else can we do with these properties besides print comic books? So he moved out to LA. But yeah, and so people always have a response like, really? When you tell them the Stan Lee papers are housed at the University of Wyoming, of all places, where he has no connection whatsoever. But people have the same reaction when James, when we tell them, oh, did you know the Bob Dylan archives are in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
But yeah, the Woody Guthrie archives make sense because Woody is an Oklahoman. But yeah, the yeah, Bob Dylan is a bit of a surprise. But and the interesting thing in reading your story that struck me is the reason that Bob Dylan agreed to have his um, archives housed in Tulsa was because of the Woody Guthrie connection, because he was sort of, a disciple of Woody Guthrie early on in his career. And you say in your story that what convinced him to agree to having it at Wyoming was that they also had papers of somebody that Stan Lee looked up to.
They have the Jack Benny collection. And Stan is famous for saying things that might or might not be true, but it sounds really good because the comic industry has never had a better promoter than Stan. Name another face of the comic industry. There's never been a promoter of the industry like him. So he said they've got Jack Benny stuff. That's good enough for me. Probably it sounded really good, and maybe it was a reason, maybe it wasn't. And I do love Jack Benny, by the way, and sometimes wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch him.
Yeah.
But the real credit for Wyoming having Stan Lee's quote unquote stuff is they had an eccentric executive director of their museum who would sometimes hitchhike across the country and just hobnob and meet people and say, "Hey, we want your stuff." And he got in early with Stan Lee in the 70s. And to put this in context, Stan Lee and his artists co-created those iconic characters in a range of about 1962 through 1965. So this was only about 10 years, 10, 11, 12 years after. I mean, that seems like a blink now. I mean, those characters would
Yeah.
have been almost new. But this Gene Gressley, this museum executive, had the foresight to go travel to see Stan Lee in the 70s and say, "Hey, we want your stuff."
Well, for I know that there are a lot of people who instantly know who Stan Lee is, but for those who may not be as versed in things Marvel, was he an artist? Was he a writer? Was he a conceptual person that said, "Here's an idea that he would then give to others to realize"? What all did he do in the comic world?
I'm glad you asked. He was primarily a writer and editor, and eventually editor in chief. Went away to war, came back, got his job at Marvel back again. Ended up being the bosses of some of the guys who were there when he was just a pup running around the office. But was not an artist. He does have a brother, Larry Lieber. Stan Lee's real last name is Lieber, who is an artist. But and then at times in his career, Stan Lee was writing so many books, like so many issues per month, that he created basically the Marvel style of storytelling. Instead of laying out a full script and saying, draw this, and here's what he's saying, and draw that in this panel, here's what he's saying. The Marvel style was Stan might call one of his artists, Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko, on the phone and say, it would be a short conversation. You draw all this, have him fight so and so, and this is the resolution, and I'll go back in and add all the dialogue later. And so it freed up the artist to go wild and take it wherever they wanted to go instead of following a strict like 6-panel guideline of this happens, this happens, this happens. And it really tapped into the creativity of not just Stan, but the artists too, who went crazy and deserve, certainly a chunk of credit for those early successes like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and Daredevil and the X-Men. Didn't create Thor. The Norse did that, but they had their own spin on it. And really how he revolutionized things is comics had been around since on newspaper stands since about the 1930s, when somebody got the idea of, hey, let's put the Sunday funnies from a newspaper, let's bound them all together and sell them at a newsstand. Well, people buy this. And then eventually people started creating original stories for those comics on the newsstands. And for the first couple of decades, those characters were mainly two-dimensional, cardboard, not much personality. But Stan comes along in the 60s, kind of ready to quit.
It was very a black hat, white hat kind of
Yes.
a, yeah.
Yeah. But Stan was kind of burned out on what he was doing by the time the 1960s got here. And the rumor is his wife tells him, if you're going to quit anyway, why don't you do a book the way you want to do it? And so from that point on, with Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Daredevil, it became not really stories about the heroes, but the story about the person inside the costume. And Peter Parker, Spider-Man, was Charlie Brown. I mean, the guy couldn't catch a break. He in every story in those early Spider-Man stories, he was just getting, beat to death by the demands of his jerk boss and his sick Aunt May and girlfriend troubles. So Stan really tapped into, let's make these characters human beings. Let's give them flaws. Iron Man has Daredevil's blind, and the Hulk, can't help it, but he transforms from a human being into this.
He has anger management
issues. And the Fantastic Four was like a family that just fought with each other all the time, which you never saw that with those other super teams from the 40s or 50s. They were all, let's go save the day. But
right. And if they had no connections to other people, that much, they would disappear until needed again. Well, has any other comic book luminary created as many characters that have had such longevity as Stan Lee?
Yeah, as I mentioned, his co-creator Jack Kirby created a ton of stuff
Okay.
over the years for DC and Marvel. At one point, he had a falling out with Marvel, went to DC and created a bunch of stuff there. But it was the magic was never really the same as when those two were working together, as opposed to working apart. But Joe Simon and Jack Kirby were creating characters in the 40s that, Captain America and so on and so forth. But as far as one person creating so many cultural icons, nobody had as many as Stan Lee. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster had Superman and the Spectre and maybe a couple of more. And, Bob Kane and Jerry Robinson, some other guys had Batman. But for a period of the 60s, Stan Lee was Midas. Everything they touched. I shouldn't say it turned to gold because the Hulk was canceled after 6 issues. It was a failure, but they kind of recycled them later and, he's still with us.
Oh, yeah. Well, you mentioning the creators of Superman and Batman, if memory serves me right, they never reaped any sort of financial windfall. They signed contracts that basically robbed them of the chance to make money off these characters that they created. Was Stan Lee a savvier businessman than they were? Was he able to, I guess being in an editorial position, he had a better control over the characters that he did create?
Yeah, all the characters he created for Marvel were kept by Marvel. That's how the industry worked for decades. Is hey, you're on salary, and if you create this for us, while you're working for us, it's ours. It's not
Yeah.
yours. So you can't go out and do all the merchandising. We get all that, and guys were just lucky to have a job, I guess, back in the day, and happy to have work after the Depression and all that good stuff. So, but where Stan capitalizes once he was the face of Marvel, he was taken care of financially because he was considered invaluable to the company and capitalized that way. But the other guys, there are lots of sad stories about artists or writers or creators who got into their upper life and just didn't have insurance or hardly anything.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Well, you being a connoisseur of comic books, judging by what I see over your shoulder, have you a favorite Stan Lee character or group of characters?
I really don't. People ask me that. My side job is I buy and sell old comic books. But I really don't have a favorite, whether it's a Stan creation or DC or Marvel or whatever. I named my son after Superman, Kal, I named Kal-El, but no, I really don't. I mean, I like them all, and I don't even have a preference between DC and Marvel. I like both companies.
Okay, all right. Well, you talked about Stan Lee being um, what was the word that you used? Indispensable. And it's obvious that you're indispensable to the Tulsa world. I'll put that out there for anybody who cares to think about that. And especially when it comes to this sort of a topic. And is there anything that we need to add more about Stan Lee that we haven't touched on yet?
Just that University of Wyoming wants to spread the word that just as Tulsa likes to spread the word that, hey, the Bob Dylan archives are here. Wyoming wants to spread the word that they have these treasures, the Stan Lee papers. And if you can find a way to get up there, whether you're a researcher or just want to go check out some stuff, then Laramie is the place to be. And
What?
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It just comes to mind. Have they uh, started an effort to digitize them? This means there's a website that people can go to at least get a sense of what's there.
They have they've gone there's 196 boxes, so it's a very
Okay.
substantial collection. And when they built this exhibit, the director of the museum knew he couldn't spare one full-time employee to go through all 196 boxes and cherry pick items. Like it couldn't be that employee's only job to do that every day. So he was smart enough to go to the honors college and to the students and recruit 3 student interns who were really jazzed about being the ones to go through those boxes. Now, those boxes had been open to researchers before, and even the
Yeah.
public if you make an appointment to go look. Uh, but the students uh, were really fired up to go through all those boxes, pick out stuff for the collections. And they're savvy enough that when I concluded an interview with one of them by saying Excelsior, which is a Stan Lee trademark, the student responded, "Nuff said," which is how Stan Lee ended his Stan soapbox.
Okay. All right. Well, do you know offhand the website that people can go for the center or the university itself?
Just Google up American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming, and
Okay.
it should have some links to direct you where you want to go. The exhibit runs through November, I believe. And because those students who built the exhibit took a road trip to Tulsa and were shown around the Dillon Center and the Guthrie Center, don't be surprised if someday part of that exhibit makes a touring stop through Tulsa. I don't want to promise anything, but don't be surprised.
Right. Well, we will keep an eye on that. So thank you, Jimmy, for enlightening us about all things Stan Lee, and thank you all for listening along. We thank you for your time, and we will gladly see you later.
Enough said.